Suddenly we hear this is the worst drought in 100-year history. This is the driest year on record. And we heard the Metropolitan Water District say they only have 16 months of water reserves left. So suddenly it sounds like this drought is serious business. It's not business as normal.
If you were a farmer in the Central Valley, you would absolutely know we're in the middle of this horrendous drought. Even though the urban areas haven't been particularly hit hard yet, the farmers see their trees dying, they see their any perennial crop is potentially at risk. And not only that, they're pumping down the groundwater in the Central Valley. They're really desperate. If it goes on for another 3 years, a lot of things are going to happen. A lot of things people don't think they can necessarily do. You can't build a dam quickly, you can't fill it up with water quickly, you can't build a big recycling plant quickly. What you can do, though, is you can conserve. And conservation is one of the very few things you can do almost immediately if you mobilize the population.
So if we had, say, another 3 years of drought, the way what we've just been through, we're likely to see massive changes, or we all will need to make some massive changes inside and outside the home, won't we? Would you care to say that there's any 1, 2, or 3 things that we should be doing to prepare?
The single most effective water conservation measure that homes can do is to change out their landscape. Go with, it's either called xeriscape or native landscaping, but something that more closely represents what nature wanted here in the first place. Every home can do what's called laundry landscape, where you take the flow out of your washing machine, route it to your trees and your bushes, and no harm at all. And it's just recently been approved by the state, so you don't have to get any permits to do that.
Wonderful. Do you care to go on the record and give any predictions? Is there any way of predicting how long this drought will go?
Well, as a civil engineer, that kind of uncertainty keeps me in business. Nobody knows. But because of the way the hydrologic cycle works, someday it's going to flip back again, and that can happen within weeks, maybe even days. And it's going to start raining, and then we're going to have floods. So no matter how much we're preoccupied with it being dry and trying to stretch out the water use, we've got to be ready for when the cycle shifts and it gets wet again and the floods start.
People are wondering about this drought, they're worried about the drought, and they're wondering what caused it. Is it climate change? Is it human activity? What is this drought about?
Oh, that's an excellent question, Marianne, because, we live in a very dry place here in California. It is dry, and we have a long history in droughts. Actually, the history of California is written in great droughts. Some last 5 years, some last 30 years. And I contend we're actually into the 17th year of a perfectly natural drought. All right. Of course, what has changed dramatically and what makes it so much more painful this time around is that since 1950, the population of California has quadrupled. All right. The structure and the size of California's economy has totally changed. It's exploded. And so there are more of us using more water. And so we're all feeling the pain. But on the other hand, the good news is that we should have seen this drought coming. Right? Because drought doesn't mean zero water. It doesn't even mean 50% of normal in terms of snowpack and rain. It's more like 10 to 20%. And that should have been manageable. All right? If we had cared for our groundwater basins and put away water for not a rainy day, a dry day, all right, we'd be in good shape now. We wouldn't be talking water rationing. So in many ways, the drought is not really the problem. The problem here in Southern California is a water management problem, all right? We should have been able to handle this, and even if this drought lasts for another 5 years, we shouldn't be on our knees, but we will be.
I know that Southern California water officials would argue that they have made massive investments in planning and in water infrastructure, like reservoirs and water storage, which is what's allowed us to get through these 3 years without feeling the pinch. But if we went ahead now, and they're saying that there's 16 months left of water supply, that it could get very scary.
If you don't know anything about history, you don't know anything. Droughts in California are always longer than 3 years. There are droughts that are 30 years. Sometimes droughts last for 15 years, but they certainly always last more than 3 years. All right. So eventually you're going to get into a drought. All right. And then you also have to plan for all the tremendous growth that has happened. Not only has the population of California quadrupled, the amount of agriculture has increased by 50%. All right. And the economy in the last 50 years has grown 1,000-fold in California. So California is now the 7th largest economy in the world, all by itself. And that requires a lot of water. And so you tell me that they've made tremendous investments in water infrastructure and water storage, and I'll tell you, not enough.
Have you seen an increase in fires these last few years?
Statewide, yes. Throughout the western United States, yes. In Glendale specifically, we've had a few incidents, but nothing where it's alarming. And I think it's typical of the state to have a certain number of fires, and I think we're maybe twice that at this time of year from what a normal year would be. So there are a lot more ignitions, and the fires are actually burning more intense, and they're burning more territory, more acres, and more houses because they are so intense.
So in these drought conditions, instead of having 20 feet buffer zone, should we have, or 50, should we have 100? Would that be the best recommendation for us?
Well, it's
around the home?
100 feet would be the recommendation regardless. The science that we've recently come across has indicated that anything beyond 100 feet really does not add any benefit to the protection of the home. The reason being is the radiant heat that's generated from flames or shrubs or trees or anything that's burning beyond 100 feet really doesn't influence the house itself. When you get within 100 feet, that's when you start noticing that radiant heat. The only difference and caveat that I would say is wildland fires often shed a lot of burning embers on houses. The uplifting of that convective heat from the fire will lift those embers high up into the sky and could fall down a mile ahead of the flaming front. You can't clear far enough to keep those embers from falling on your house. So what you have to do is keep your house protected, which means keeping embers from getting into pine needles on your roof, those little piles of leaves that kind of get tucked along the corner of your wood deck. You have to be vigilant about keeping these areas clear and maintained at all times. You know, whether the fire department is there inspecting or not, you need to make sure that your home is protected. So if these falling embers get in those little cracks and crevices, that they won't ignite the house from fire. One of the things that most people don't realize is in the event of a wildfire is once that flaming front moves through, oftentimes that's not what causes the house to be ignited. It's the embers that are left behind. And shortly after it gets a little foothold, could be 30 minutes or a couple hours later, finally starts generating enough heat, and then the wall or the deck or something ignites, and that's when the house burns.
So, Nan, I think when people think of drought-tolerant landscapes, immediately they think Phoenix, they think cactus, they think rock gardens. So are we talking that? Are we talking rock gardens and cactus?
We could be. There are cactus and succulent gardens that make sense with certain architecture, and in certain areas of a garden, people sometimes like to blend the Mediterranean mixture and some of the more structural plants like an agave. But really, we're talking about what we call a Mediterranean mixture of plants. Southern California friendly, not just California native.
In terms of water supply, why are they a desirable plant palette for us?
They are native to areas that are very dry and that can go through a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks without irrigation, that are habitat plants. A number of them are the plants that will pull in what we want in our gardens. Besides the texture and the color of the plant, we want what I have always called air action. We want beneficial insects, we want hummingbirds, we want butterflies, we want bees. The bees are necessary for pollination of our citrus and a lot of our agriculture. And so these plants make sense because they save water, because they're beautiful, because they add color to the garden, and they are habitat plants.